Welcome, everyone, to the second half of the marketing management material that we started in class on November the 2nd. And we will go through the rest of the PowerPoint, and that will be in preparation, of course, for the test in Module 5. So I'm going to share the screen here to the PowerPoint. We're on slide number 17. And we're now shared. Okay. So as we were discussing in the first part of the class about selecting suppliers and developing sales objectives and so forth, and determining which merchandise we're going to actually offer to the clients, we now should, as we're going into the information for talking directly to the consumer and having them pick out merchandise. And again, with most of our discussions, it seems that it's centered around casket sales and so forth, the casket presentations. It doesn't necessarily be limited to that, but that's the reality that from a testing standpoint, and probably the easiest way to present the material, it's just done, generally speaking, with caskets, and it is the largest item in most arrangements for in terms of total dollars for merchandise to be used in the arrangement. So so just bear with me a second. Okay, just getting where my notes are. And so of course we had mentioned that putting a family at ease is really done through empowering them with product knowledge, and that their buying decisions are often made much not only easier, but they tend to buy something a little nicer when they have information. So when they're given the opportunity to learn about funeral service merchandise, and the funeral director gives them the time and the effort to empower them with that knowledge, they will often perceive the greatest value. So in terms of what kind of information should be included in a pre-selection merchandise presentation, so the first thing that we have to do is make sure that we're giving the required federal, and if there's any state disclosures about, for instance, for caskets, and that in a cremation package, for instance, that a casket is not necessarily required, but maybe if a certain arrangement is chosen, for instance, a funeral with a viewing, then a casket would then likely be needed and would need to be purchased. Making sure that you present your information timely. We have to make sure that we give a general price list anytime we begin to talk about funeral arrangements. And of course, prior to going into the selection room, going into to choose caskets, and the same thing goes for burial vaults, that we need to make sure that we're giving price lists for both those items, for burial containers or vaults, and also our casket price list. It needs to be presented to the consumer. It doesn't need to be given to them for retention, but does need to be given to them prior to entering the selection room and the discussion of caskets. So you should give them some idea about the quantity and the actual merchandise that's on display, the price range. There may be other merchandise on display depending on where you're showing that. If it's in a separate room, or might be, of course, in the same room as the arrangement. That's the way it is for our funeral home. And then you start to give them some basic information about different construction materials, the different linings, different finishes, and so on. And maybe touch on what other factors that might influence the total costs. Whether or not a burial vault is required. If the vault is going to provide maybe some protection and the consumer might not feel the need to have the same level of protection for a casket, for instance. The merchandising aids are often helpful. You may have samples of different metals or wood, as opposed to seeing full-size caskets, or even the quarter eighth cuts. And some of it might be presented in a presentation binder. And there'll be some other things in that binder that would likely need to be given to the consumer for them to view as well. And we'll get through that. So, the two critical factors in making sure that the consumer receives the information that's needed to make the decision, and that the information is given in a manner that gently and patiently educates them. So just as we just discussed, some of the methodologies that you can use to give people that information. So your goal, really should be to reduce the consumer's apprehension. So they certainly, not all the time, but there are many that suffer from some anxiety and so forth about choosing a casket for some of the reasons we talked about in class, just a personal thing, and a financial part of it, because they know that this is not going to be picking out prayer cards for $150 or $300 or something. This is going to be a significant purchase. So in determining the selection room, there's a couple of different methodologies. The first is the direct method, which is selling merchandise, and the funeral home or the funeral director would remain in the selection room throughout the selection process. So you enter the selection room, you may start to talk about a casket or two that's in front of you. The first, the approach units, as it's called, and begin the discussion about the other caskets that are available, and then kind of guiding the consumer through the selection room to the different caskets that are available, both in style and price and so forth. The other is the indirect method, which would be where the funeral director does not stay in the selection room, and this is probably depending on the consumer, depending on how many times they may have done this before, depending on, you can kind of gauge their level of questions and so forth. But you introduce the room, tell the people, where the caskets, how they may be organized and so forth, and let them essentially peruse through the room, looking at the different materials, looking at the caskets, and then choosing from there. You might step in a time or two just to see if there's any questions. But those are the two most popular methods. So sometimes in that indirect, I know personally, I tend to be, more of the direct, using the direct method. But there are times when I'll go in and let the families go through that selection room, and then I might go back and start or complete some of the paperwork, the statement of funeral goods and other paperwork that needs to be completed. So. I'm just looking at my notes, and seems to be that I've skipped a couple of things maybe, but okay. So the demonstration group or the educational group, as you're first walking in the room, is 3 or 4 caskets that are used to educate the consumer regarding the elements of casket construction. So again, you may have a metal casket, and you may show the gasket features, maybe the interior feature for that particular casket, or maybe it's a velvet interior. The next one might be another metal casket that doesn't have a gasket, and looking at maybe the bed of the explaining that it can be adjusted up or down, generally depending on the person that's in the casket, and then you might move to different kind of wood, and then maybe there's a cloth covered casket or something, and going through those features for each one of them. You also once you're at this point, and this can be done in a couple of different ways, but you need to make sure that you present the warranty information which would be in compliance with the Magnuson-Moss Warranty Act. And the next couple of slides, we're going to talk a little bit about warranties and specifically the information that needs to be included for the presentation that we make to consumers. So this is covered under the UCC, which is the Uniform Commercial Code. It became federal statute in 1974, and the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, oversees the act, and it applies to tangible property that's valued at $15 or more. So just about everything that we sell is subject to some sort of warranty discussion or is covered that way. And the act covers both express and implied warranties. So we'll talk now about not only warranties, but in more detail about what the difference between express and implied warranties. So the FTC definition of a warranty is any written affirmation or promise made in connection with the sale of products, which promises that the material or workmanship is defect-free or will meet a specific level of performance over a specified period of time. So we're all likely familiar with different types of warranties, whether it's an automobile warranty or an appliance warranty or maybe an electronics warranty. And they're not, they all fall under this same requirement for as according to the Federal Trade Commission, when someone is selling to the consumer some type of goods. So we'll now talk about express warranties, and this is voluntarily assumed by the manufacturer, and it sets out to let you know what the product will or won't do, and then what kind of recourse there is if that doesn't happen. So if there is something that goes wrong, if something breaks, if it's not operating the way that it should, then the warranty is going to specifically point out what the steps are to act on the warranty and make sure that the consumer is covered. So it's frequently created by oral or written statements about the product. So we have to be careful, especially when we're presenting caskets, for instance. And we talked in the last class or maybe the one before that about metal caskets and the difference between a gasketed casket or description of the gasket as opposed to a sealer, which was a term that had been used for a lot of times. And the sealer description, even in just its words, implies something different than necessarily what is meant. And what's meant is that there is a gasket that helps keeps the elements from entering the inside of the casket, but it is not a perfect seal. That would have to be done either hermetically or there are other methods that actually would provide much more of a perfect seal. But the gasket that goes around the casket is not one of those. So it doesn't need to include the terms of the warranty or the guarantee. It could be, again, it could be written, and it could be, if you make an oral statement, then that could be considered a warranty of the product. So we need to be careful. Implied warranties, on the other hand, are created by law as a matter of public policy. It does not necessarily represent a written agreement between the buyer and the seller. But it does, the act of selling the item implies that the product is in good condition and is safe to use. So you don't have to have a written agreement that says that. If you're selling someone an item, it should be assumed that it is in good condition and is safe to use. And anything that's been decided by the court has liberally been interpreted to protect the buyer. So if there is any issue, chances are they're going to fall on the side of the consumer if there's any question. And there's a high degree of implied warranty for funeral service due to the consumer's general lack of information about funeral service and the reliance on the funeral director. So if the consumer feels like the casket is not was not sold the proper way, and it doesn't do what it should. For instance, they get to the cemetery and the back of the casket is falling off. Well, there would be a warranty, without there having to have been a written or an oral warranty, any discussion about it. The consumer should have every right to feel that what they purchased, that a casket should be intact, for instance. So, and they're relying on the funeral director to make sure that the item that they purchased actually does that and is free of defects. Unless you're selling a casket, you could sell something that's what they call scratch and dent or something like that. Then in that case, if you point it out to the consumer, then they're not selling it as brand new, but actually giving them a discount based on somewhat limited damage. But then further, talking about the fact that there is nothing that would jeopardize the actual use of the casket, or that any of those features would be jeopardized. And it covers the funeral director because it's implied that the merchandise is fit for the purpose intended. So someone couldn't come back later on and make some claim that they didn't need a casket for a burial, or they didn't need a burial vault, when in fact it is it is required. So a written warranty could be a full warranty or a limited warranty. A full warranty, the requirements are that you have to make sure that you have the name and address of the warrantor, which is the company essentially that is providing the warranty. The person to whom the warranty is directed, is it the family? Does it protect the funeral home in this case? Who is it that this warranty protects? What exactly is covered? And again, we're projecting this on funeral service, but really any warranty, any full warranty would need these items covered. It needs to have a beginning and an ending. So when does the warranty go into effect, and whether or not in nearly every case there is an ending. Maybe it's 12 months, maybe it's 5 years, maybe it's 10 years. A burial vault, there are some that have warranties that are 30 or maybe even 50 years. It will outline what the warrantor will do and when they will do it based on a warranty claim being made. It will outline what the consumer must do to activate the warranty. And any warranty that is not a full warranty must clearly indicate that it is a limited warranty. So if it doesn't have those words, then it would be assumed to be a full warranty and not a limited one. So the duties of the seller of the warranty is that they need to make sure that the manufacturer warranties are available before the sale. And this can be done in a couple of different ways. The first of which is that it could be done in close conjunction with the product. So you could have it framed on a wall or in a binder or on the packaging. The binder, should be indexed and according to the product and readily available to the consumer. It should be kept current and should have a sign indicating the location of where the full warranty is located. And if you have it in a binder, it should be displayed in a location that's anticipated to catch the consumer's attention so that they can actually review the warranty. So whether it's in a frame, whether it's in a presentation binder, or in some sort of written place that is disclosed to the consumer. So a disclaimer of warranties is allowed, especially within funeral service, and this is not a bad business practice, and I'm sure that it's not a requirement necessarily, but it's good business practice, that in clear, specific language, you could make sure that you are making it known that any of the warranties that are available are warranties of the manufacturer and not of the funeral home itself. So anything that would be provided as a warranty would be covered by the manufacturer, and that is a critical piece if there is a claim. It should be presented again in a clear and conspicuous manner, and should be in boldface print on the casket price list, the outer burial container price list, and the statement of funeral goods and services selected. So it is allowed, and it is, again, good business practice. You don't have to do that, but it does certainly, outline those terms, and can have some effect on not making the funeral home liable for any warranty items. So this is an example of a sample warranty, and the disclaimer about in there where it says the only warranties available in connection with the goods and services sold with the funeral are express written warranties, if any, extended by the manufacturer. The undersigned acknowledge the availability of the express written warranty and the contents thereof. So that's your disclosure. So funeral service warranty requirements. The funeral director must present the manufacturer's claims exactly as they are. If you embellish on something and say that a casket, for instance, is going to last 70 years or something like that, and there is a claim later on because there's a disinterment and the casket is basically has deteriorated to a point where it's unrecognizable or something, the funeral home could be liable for a warranty that was only for, say, 10 years from the manufacturer, in this case the funeral home said something that was not true, and they can actually then be liable. So you have to make sure that you're only going to state what the manufacturer claims in terms of a warranty. And you can't change or alter the contents of the warranty. The warranty is what it is from the manufacturer. The consumer should be able to get copies of the warranties by telephone or mail, or, really in this case, you can get that by email as well. It just needs to be given to them if they request a copy. And the warranty can't be conditioned upon the return of a warranty card. I know we see these a lot with especially electronics and so forth, and them wanting you to return a card so that it would make the warranty, give you the impression that the warranty would then be in effect, and only in effect based on that. The reality is, that's just a way to collect information to sell you further, sell you other goods down the line, whether it's by phone or email or by mail. If you have a warranty and you keep the bill of sale, the invoice, so forth, the paid invoice, well, that's when your warranty, if that's what the warranty says, that upon purchase is when it begins. So returning the warranty card is not necessary. Okay, so as we move along, and we'll talk now about the display, traditional display of funeral merchandise. And in the merchandising book on page 152 is where we're located. So, what kind of merchandise, can be displayed? Well, just about anything that we sell, can be. It's not necessarily, there isn't a restriction, but we generally have caskets and vaults and register books and thank you cards and maybe some jewelry and urns. All those types of things are certainly common in a selection room. But it doesn't have to be a selection room, but traditionally that's where it was. And the way that merchandise is displayed can have a serious impact on the consumer's comfort level and their perceived value of the merchandise. So if you just have things just sitting out on a table, for instance, maybe urns, that may give them some perception of value versus having a very nice display with it maybe backlit or something like that. That will give a different type of, and have a different impact on the consumer based on how it is that you present to them. So in the clicker book on page 135, we talked about the display of funeral merchandise, which can include a catalog, a computer, photographs, and so forth. websites, at this point. And, it's not just having the physical items in front of someone. On page 136, there's some discussions about different types of lighting, halogen lighting, LED lighting, and what's termed green lighting, and how that display, those display options, how they affect the consumer's value. So look at those pages on 135 and 136. And then continuing on 137 is some of the enhancements that are sometimes made in the selection room, and in displays. So I can take a look at those 3 pages there in the clicker book. As we talk about a traditional selection room and which would include, of course, full-size caskets, at least some, in the both in the merchandising book as well as the clicker book, there's a discussion about both. So first of all, the recommendation for full-size selection rooms, in terms of the recommended number of caskets, is a minimum of 12 and a maximum of 30. So the 12 would give the consumer, certainly a much better idea about the differences in casket selections and what the different types of materials and price ranges and so forth. Once you get above 30 caskets, it starts to become very confusing for the consumer, and actually lengthens will likely lengthen the amount of time that's going to take. And you have people that aren't necessarily looking to purchase this item anyway. So adding a level of stress because there's so many to choose from is not that you can't do it. These are just recommendations. So how much space should be allotted per casket? And again, what's recommended is somewhere between 40 to 60 square feet per casket is recommended. And it's also recommended that that one room be used for the casket selection, not moving it into different rooms. When I worked in Princeton, we did have to do that. We had two separate rooms, one that had basically metal caskets, the other had wood caskets because of the space limitations that we had. So what is a furniture grouping, and what's the purpose in the selection room? So furniture grouping is literally that. It's not the caskets themselves. It often might be a table, a lamp, maybe a couple of chairs within easy view for the family when they enter. Kind of gives them something familiar, and so that they can relate, and maybe it will help relieve some of the tension. That's the goal. Having a more comfortable room and so forth, and having things like that make it seem like a living room type thing. The more that you can do that, the less apprehension that the consumer will have. It also gives them the opportunity to sit in case someone feels it's necessary to get off their feet. As we said, there's often some apprehension that's involved, and sometimes people might feel a little dizzy or something like that. So giving them an opportunity to sit for a moment is often helpful. And how important is traffic control in the selection room, and why is that? Well, naturally, the studies have shown that people naturally go to the right when they enter a room. Now, sometimes that may not make sense if you're entering a room and you can't go to the right, but keeping that in mind, and that most people tend to do that, you might set up your selection room and your arrangement of the merchandise in a particular way if that's the way that most people enter. And that's exactly the way it is for our selection room. You can go straight ahead, but you kind of enter from the left and make a right into the room as you're first entering. So after people have entered the room, the arrangement of the merchandise, there's a few different methodologies as you're entering the room. And so the first would be a demonstrational or an educational group, so that as you first walk in, you can use this. They're sometimes called approach units. It's 3 or 4 caskets that are utilized to educate the consumers in selecting the casket, and it kind of gives them an idea for the different elements of casket construction. So there should be a variety of caskets in here, as we were discussing earlier. So whether you have a demonstrational or an educational group, often that's used, and then in conjunction with a consecutive method, which would place caskets for selection in their order of increasing or decreasing value. Often you have different caskets that are mixed because they're grouped according to price. So you may have, if you're starting with your lower end caskets, not only would you have maybe some wood and metal selections, but you might have some cloth covered selections or something else that would be on the lower end of the price spectrum. And then as you move up, in increasing value, some of those lower end caskets, like cloth covered and less expensive caskets, are going to drop off. It's probably going to be a little more limited to the materials of wood and metal as you move forward. But you could have in the same general price range, maybe even exactly the same price, a metal casket and a wood casket. The group method is caskets that could be grouped according to a variety of different factors. So you can, maybe using different materials or style or appearance and price for that matter. So the material could be, all woods or all bronze. They're, sometimes referred to as families of merchandise, or you'll hear the term the world approach, which is, within the world of metal caskets, or within the maple world, or those kinds of things. That's a terminology that's often used. So alternate pricing, each group might have a low, a medium, and a high cost casket. So if you have, again, if you're showing metal caskets, you may have a 20 gauge non-gasketed casket, then maybe an 18 gauge casket, and then maybe a 16 gauge or a stainless steel or a copper or bronze, something that would go from the lower end of the price spectrum to maybe the high end. Their appearance, you could have some caskets that are open, you can have some that are closed. You can have all half couch caskets together, and then maybe if you happen to show a full open casket, maybe that's your you have a mixture, or maybe that's grouped together. Price points, as I said before, in the consecutive method, you can have different price points that are selected that are historically where the consumers have been comfortable. 3 or 4 caskets might be shown at a particular price, and generally the caskets, of course, are mixed, for that within that price spectrum. That's where often that good, better, best from Dr. Duty, as we mentioned last class, where the displays of caskets are in groups according to their relative positions within their value or price progression. This is often an approach used in retail business, and therefore the consumer may have some idea about, even subconsciously, that this is being done, and they are used to buying things that way. Okay, so we already talked about the demonstrational or the educational. We talked about the consecutive method, placing the caskets in their order of increasing or decreasing value. Guess I got ahead of ourselves here a little bit. And that the types of caskets are mixed and grouped according to price. And then in the group method, that they be grouped according to a variety of factors, such as material, style, appearance, and price. So now we'll kind of finish up with some of the display equipment and so forth that would be found typically in a showroom. So again, these are some recommendations, that a casket would be in the 26 to 30 inches from the floor, from the bottom of the casket down to the floor, no higher than that and no lower than that. That's about, your average height for, and what most people are used to approaching a casket is about that height. You can use, a church truck to display. You can use a casket stand, or sometimes called a casket standard, which is, it doesn't have wheels usually. It's a stationary type of display, and the casket is placed on top of it. You can use a casket rack. We have a number of these where we have some caskets on a lower sort of level, and then the rack has the ability to place another casket on top of it without, of course, touching the casket underneath it. You can use a bier. This is often used in the actual, for the funeral. It is a much nicer presentation. They're often made of wood, but some of them are made of metal, of course, too. It's a way during the funeral for the casket to be displayed during a funeral. Not as much in the selection process, but that doesn't mean that you couldn't use it there. So casket signage, as we're wrapping this part of the marketing material up. It should be that every casket is clearly identified by its name and price. It should be easily cross-referenced on the casket price list, and informative placards for each casket identifying the features of that casket should be in, on, or around that casket individually, and it should be consistent so that they can compare one casket from another as to what the features are and so forth for those individual caskets. So the post-selection merchandise, we talked about what happens before we go in the selection room, then what happens with the consumer inside the selection room. So then after they've exited the selection room, what kind of procedures are followed after that. So the first thing to do is to make sure and verify that the selection that the consumer is talking about is the one that they want. They could be confused, especially if you're using that indirect method. They might say the name of a casket that was actually not the one that they wanted. So you should make sure clearly that what it is that they are interested in using for the funeral, whether it could be a better casket, or in some cases, you might assume that it was something greater, and therefore regardless, the price is likely not going to be correct for the choice that they were making. Make sure to give this required federal and state disclosures that, quite frankly, should have been handed out in the before going into the room, but does include some of the warranty information based on the casket that they've chosen. Then compute the total expenses and complete the statement of funeral goods and services. Most funeral directors would probably leave those selections to the end of an arrangement. It doesn't have to be done that way. You could certainly do it as the first thing. But once that's completed, then the rest of the items should be completed in terms of what the service is going to be, what the total charges and estimates will be for the funeral. And then verify the method of payment. Is it going to be cash? Is it going to be credit? Is it going to be a credit card, an insurance assignment, maybe pre-funded funeral proceeds, which is done in a pre-arrangement. Many funeral homes use what's called choices, but it could be done with an insurance product as well. And so verifying how the consumer is going to pay for the funeral is quite important. So there is a selection room discussion in the Winning Ways on page 60 to 69. That's worth a read if you get the opportunity to read that. Most of that's a fairly quick read and can give you some further information as well. Stop the share, and that would end the discussion about the marketing piece. And we'll see you in class on Tuesday.